Welcome, everyone. My name is Malik Murray, and I am a proud double demon and member of the Finance Advisory Board serving on the FAB's Diversity Council. I would like to thank the Finance Advisory Board and Chair Julie Pulley for her leadership, my fellow FAB Diversity Council members, Helena Robbins Huddleston, Kirk Wunderlich, Christine Fleps, and Yasmin Ahmed for their service and commitment to DePaul University. I also want to thank Dean Tom Donnelly for his service and vision for the future. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention the Department of Finance, the real estate chair, Tom Berry, who happens to be my corporate finance professor and golf buddy. And last but not least, I want to thank both Dr. Esteban and John's amazing teams who have organized today's event. Before we begin, I would like to briefly introduce Dr. Gabriel Esteban. Dr. Esteban is the 12th president of DePaul University. He assumed this role in July of 2017. And it's hard to believe both he and his lovely wife, Jo, have been with us for nearly 4 years. While Dr. Esteban and Jo are rabid basketball fans, I'm told Jo was the baller in the family. Since arriving at DePaul University, Dr. Esteban has rolled up his sleeves since day one, leading the school's current strategic plan grounded in mission, the plan for DePaul 2024, which calls for the university's deepening its commitment to Catholic Ascension urban mission, ensuring an environment that fosters inclusion and prepares students for global citizenship. Dr. Esteban believes that to be an effective leader, access and transparency are important. Prior to joining the DePaul family, Dr. Esteban served as the president of Seton Hall University, a fellow Big East Conference school, where he led the institution through a number of successful initiatives, including the establishment of the only private medical school in the state of New Jersey in partnership with Hackensack Meridian Health. Dr. Esteban holds a doctorate in business administration from the Graduate School of Management at the University of California, Irvine, and a master's in Japanese business studies from Chaminade University in Honolulu. He earned his MBA and bachelor's degree in mathematics from the University of the Philippines. A celebrated leader and advocate for minorities, Dr. Esteban has received numerous accolades throughout his career, including the Embassy of the Philippines awarding him the Certificate of Achievement in 2013. The importance of education runs through and through the Esteban household, with Jo earning her master's in economics and bachelor's in business economics from the University of the Philippines. She also holds an MBA from the University of California, Riverside. Dr. Esteban and Jo's daughter, Isabella, and her husband are both medical doctors. So much for an underachieving family. And with that, I turn the discussion over to you, Dr. Esteban.
Thank you, Malik. It's a pleasure to be here. I would like to extend a warm welcome to the Vincentians and Daughters of Charity who may be watching, as well as members of DePaul's Board of Trustees. The first time I met John, I believe it was my first few months here in Chicago, we found a connection over basketball. I played basketball growing up in the Philippines, and John was captain of the varsity basketball team at Princeton University. However, unlike John, I've never had a chance to play Michael Jordan one-on-one. John founded Ariel Investments in 1983. The global value-based asset management firm has offices in Chicago, New York, Washington, D.C., and Sydney. It is the first Black-owned mutual fund firm. Having founded Ariel at the young age of 24, John has one of the longest track records in the business. He rooted Ariel in a patient investment or long-term investment philosophy, leveraging the market's short-term focus to uncover mispriced companies whose true value will be realized over time. The firm's flagship fund, Ariel Fund, has a 34-year track record of outperformance. This month, Wall Street Journal included Ariel on its list of top-performing mid-cap value funds. John is a member of the board of directors at McDonald's, Nike, and the New York Times Company. He serves as vice chair of the board of trustees at the University of Chicago. He's also a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and director of the Robert F. Kennedy Center for Justice and Human Rights. John is a vocal advocate for closing the racial wealth gap. And last week, Ariel launched a new initiative to invest in and scale sustainable minority owned businesses. Called Project Black, the private fund business is backed by a $200 million commitment from JP Morgan. John, you exemplify DePaul's Vincentian mission to serve the public good. And we are honored to have you join us for today's Fireside Chat. Thank you for being here.
Really glad to be here too.
Let's get started. Let's start by talking about the racial wealth gap. It doesn't seem like the wealth gap in this country is getting better, especially over the last few months, to say the least. Your thoughts on this?
I think the major point that I've been emphasizing is that it's getting much, much worse. People know there's this huge wealth gap between African Americans and white Americans. That's widely understood now. But I think what's not widely understood is how much it's getting worse year by year, even before the pandemic. So I give sort of a couple of points of emphasis. One, Ray Bashara, who's at the St. Louis Fed, has data that shows for college-educated Blacks between 1992 and 2016, African-American college-educated Blacks saw their wealth decline 10%, while college-educated whites saw their wealth increase 96%. That's a huge discrepancy over roughly 25 years. Secondly, you might know Dean Corwin Charles at Yale's Business School. He used to be here at the University of Chicago. He has data and lots of data, but my favorite point is that he makes is that relative to white Americans today, African Americans are worse off than our grandparents were, which is pretty dramatic. And then the final thing from a wealth gap standpoint that I bring up is if you look at the Cranes every year comes up with a list of top 300 privately held companies. Roughly 20 years ago, 6 of the 300 companies were African American. Today, we only have 3 on the list and none in the top 150. 20 years ago, we had at least 3 of the top 150 companies were Black owned. So it's just been the steady slide deterioration that gets worse and worse.
Okay. As we rebuild our communities and businesses, there have been strong calls for working with Black-owned businesses. Is that the reason or the impetus behind launching Ariel's new initiative, the Black Project? Can you tell us more about how you hope this new fund will help?
Well, we're hoping that the Project Black will help really change the conversation because so many people talk about the importance of access to capital, which is important, but we also need access to customers. Mm-hmm. And one of the things we also talk about is that it's so important to get the narrative going that we want to build large Black businesses of scale. You know, a generation ago, we had these giant Black businesses here in Chicago. You know, Johnson Publishing was the largest Black business in the country. It had a headquarters building in the South Loop that was just beautiful, overlooking Grant Park. We had Johnson Products, the largest Black-owned company to go public, the first Black-owned company to go public in the United States. And they made Afro Sheen and Ultra Sheen hair care products. These giant companies employed hundreds, if not thousands of people. They worked with Black businesses in everything that we did, from architecture to accountants, to law firms, to consulting firms, to money managers. They were a 1-2 firm ecosystem that built enormous wealth on the south side of Chicago. So what Project Black hopes to do is to replicate those success stories, to not just have a couple of Johnson Products and Johnson Publishing, but to have hopefully a dozen of those that are being built up over the next 10 years. Companies that are having hundreds, if not billions of dollars in sales that will build real scale, real multi-generational wealth and be here for the long term. And they'll do it by not only raising capital to support growing Black businesses, but helps have capital there for Black entrepreneurs to buy divisions of large white companies. Yeah. And by buying them, all of a sudden, with our capital and their leadership, these white divisions of large companies will become Black owned. And they will be businesses of scale where people, big, giant Fortune 500 companies have said they can't find Black businesses of scale. Now they'll have more companies that they can work with and help them grow and thrive and succeed, which will make our economy stronger, make our Black business ecosystem stronger, and again, create wealth and opportunity for African Americans they never could have dreamed of.
Thank you, John. The FDIC recently published a report about the decline in minority-owned banks. In the mid-1980s, there are nearly 15,000 minority-owned commercial banks across the country compared to just under 4,500 in 2019. What impact do you think this has had on minority businesses across the board?
It's been a devastating impact. And, here in Chicago, we went from having two of the largest Black banks in the country, Independence Bank and Seaway, to having them both gone and basically no true Black bank here in our hometown. So it's had a devastating impact. As part of the reason we don't have the success that I would have hoped to see over the last 40 years, and why we don't have as many successful Black businesses, because we don't have as many successful Black banks. That's a critical miss. I think it happens partly because our anchor institutions are not working, or did not work with those large Black banks. If all of the anchor institutions in Chicago 40 years ago, 30 years ago, 20 years ago had made a commitment to bank with Seaway and Independence Bank, those banks would still thrive. The big corporations in town, the big universities, the big hospitals, the big museums, all cared. But what happens is we lost that thread, and that sense that there was a responsibility of our anchor institutions to work with minority-owned institutions, in particular minority-owned banks. And these anchor institutions didn't see the spin-off effects, that if they supported these Black banks, then those Black banks would be loaning to local businesses, and our urban communities would be that much stronger. And so we've lost that thread.
You supported a corporate board diversity bill in Illinois in 2019. How can corporate boards support diversity in their companies? And what can people do to prepare themselves for board work in the future?
Well, Speaker Chris Welch really worked hard to get that legislation into place. And by forcing companies to be transparent about the lack of diversity of their boards, it's had an enormous impact already. Big companies like Walgreens and others that had no diversity on the boards all of a sudden found talented people like Valerie Jarrett, really gifted people like Valerie Jarrett, to put on their boards because of that initiative of Speaker Welch. We think transparency makes all the difference. What we believe is, though, as you put diversity on the agenda, that you want to make sure that you put diverse board members who are willing to fight for economic justice and social justice once they're in the boardroom, to really move the needle, ask the tough questions, force corporations to live up to the values that they say they care about. So we think it's important to have more diverse directors, but we want to make sure we have the right diverse directors. Because if you have diverse directors who don't speak out and fight for economic justice and social justice, you're in effect giving permission for the status quo to stay the same. And again, minority board members can drive change with everything, not only the management team, making sure that the management looks like Chicago or Illinois, but also push companies to do business with minority-owned businesses and live those values, and create philanthropy for local institutions that really need it. So boards run the companies. They set the priorities, and we need those diverse perspectives in the boardroom that are going to challenge authority and make change that'll really be responsible and helpful for our city and our state.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, John. You sit on the boards of Nike, McDonald's, and New York Times. You're also one of the founders of the Black Corporate Directors Conference. Tell us more about this effort and its impact it's having on corporate America.
Well, I sort of touched on it a little bit, but I'll just take a moment because it is really one of our signature programs at Ariel and something we're really proud of. The Black Corporate Directors now is 17 years old. We started it with Charles Tribbett, who was the senior partner at Russell Reynolds. And the idea was to bring African Americans together once a year. And one, of course, network. All of us that are on corporate boards need to know each other better. Second, learn from each other how to be leaders in the boardroom. And then third, how to lead around these uncomfortable subjects around economic justice and social justice. The presumption of the conference is often, if you were the only person in the boardroom, you didn't quite know how to get that agenda into the boardroom discussion. It was just uncomfortable. And so one of the things we wanted to learn from each other, how to do that. And so we started with 30 directors at the Gleacher Center here in Chicago. The last year we did the conference before COVID, we had over 200 directors in Laguna Beach, and of all the largest companies in the world. Everyone you'd expect has come to our conference at one time or another. We've been really blessed over the years to have leaders, corporate CEOs like the Jamie Dimons of the world and the Jeff Immelts of the world, and David Rubenstein from Carlisle, and John Canning from Madison Dearborn, Andy McKenna from McDonald's, had really extraordinary leaders that, from the majority institutions. And also, of course, the really successful Black CEOs, Ken Chenault, Ursula Burns, Don Thompson. It's just been something, Roz Brewer, who's now the new CEO of Walgreens. Those kind of folks have come to our conference, and it's just been wonderful to hear from them. But the highlight for me each year at the conference is we have what we call the conscience of the conference. On Friday night, we've had people like the late Congressman John Lewis, Harry Belafonte, Reverend Jackson, and former Ambassador Andy Young, and former Mayor of Atlanta, really Representative Clyburn, and even President Obama and his Attorney General Eric Holder, Valerie Jarrett, people like that who speak on Friday night to remind all of us as board members the sacrifices that were made to open up these doors for us, and realizing that if we don't pay it forward and have the ability to do it, John Lewis often talked about that when we see something that's not right, that's not just, to understand that we have a moral responsibility to speak up, speak out, make good trouble. And so the conference has been very successful. More and more directors are speaking out, I think making good trouble in the boardroom. The Asian communities created a conference based on our conference. The Latino communities also created a conference based on our conference. We support each other's conferences, speak at each other's conferences, celebrate each other's conferences. And I think it's been something we're quite proud of, and think hopefully we can change the world a little bit through our Black Directors Conference.
Thank you, John. That's actually a good lead-in. You talked about a number of elected officials, because we all know that corporations aren't the only ones with responsibility here. What can elected officials locally and across the country do to support Black business?
I think, a couple of things. I think from a federal level, I think it would be a dream come true if the major contractors understood that they should be doing business with Black businesses in everything we do. Defense contractors, the healthcare companies, the airlines, all those kinds of folks. I think from a federal standpoint, we could make that change with this new progressive leadership that we have in Washington, both in the House and in the White House. I think secondly, locally here in Illinois, I think leaders can push all the anchor institutions to work with minority businesses, the universities, the hospitals, and the corporations, because so many people go to Springfield for support and help. And so we need to ask those tough questions, have our leaders asking those tough questions, and do it in a couple of ways. One of the things we've agreed to do at the Black Directors Conference is to keep track of purchasing by category, and to really get rid of the term supplier diversity and make it like the University of Chicago uses the term business diversity. Because as you know well, the economy's moved from a sort of commodity-based economy to a professional services, financial services, and technology-based economy. So if we want to make a dent in this wealth gap, we've got to include African Americans in the parts of the spend where the wealth and jobs are created today. You know the kind of people you want to have on your trustee list, right? It's mostly the private equity guys, the hedge fund guys, the venture capitalists, the tech entrepreneurs, because that's where the dollars are. Those are the folks that can help make DePaul stronger. So that's where political leaders can push to get these anchor institutions to do business with Black people in the parts of the economy, again, where the wealth and jobs are created today, and get rid of the term supplier diversity and make it business diversity. I think if we're all on message around that, we can all move the needle together.
And before I shift gears, John, I also like to say I appreciate, I know early on when we met, one of the comments you had to me was you wanted to DePaul to become more engaged in terms of purchasing from minority women-owned businesses. And as a result of that conversation, actually included it in our strategic plan. So our goal is to have 20% of our purchases. That's across all things from services, investments, and so on, come from minority, women-owned, and veteran businesses. So that's something which our board has adopted, and I appreciate that early conversation we had, because I know we talked about that. Okay.
Oh,
So
well, thank you. Well, I stay on message, but thank you for remembering that, because you can really make such a difference and be a role model for the other nonprofits here in Chicago and the nation.
And I appreciate that. So let me shift gears a little bit. You're the Chief Investment Officer at Ariel and have been recognized as one of the 99 greatest investors. Can you share some general investing tips with us as we go forward and build wealth and none of the GameStop kind of stuff?
Well, as you know, we're long-term investors, and we're the only money management firm that has a turtle as a logo to remind people that slow and steady wins the race, and that old Aesop's fable still has value today. My major theme as a value investor, that I tell people, the major thing I've learned over these 38 years at Ariel is that Warren Buffett is very infrequently wrong. And his message that, last century, the Dow started at less than around 66 and ended the century at over 11,000. And, last century, we had a pandemic. We had a Great Depression. We had the Roaring 20s. We had 2 world wars. We had the Vietnam War, the Korean War. President Kennedy was assassinated. We had 1968. We had all kinds of horrible things that went on, and some really great things that went on. But again, the Dow went from 66 to over 11,000. So my major message to people is to think long term. Believe in America, believe that our capitalist democracy is the best system ever invented. I've got my Statue of Liberty tie on today, to remind us of that. And, I think too many people get swept up in the short-term noise of all the controversy and stress that happens that the media wants to talk about. It scares people out of the markets. There's always a drama happen. And what we find is, as Warren Buffett often says, volatility should be your friend. You want to be greedy when others are fearful. And so my main message to your question is, one, think long-term, believe in America, and have that ability to be contrarian, to not chase yesterday's fads, buy things that are out of favor that you can own for the long run. And if you do that, you'll be a success. Don't try to time the market. And again, don't follow the crowd.
Thank you. Really good advice. Your father was a Tuskegee Airman, and your mother was the first Black female graduate from the University of Chicago Law School. How did their level of achievement influence you?
It's interesting, is I'm sure it happens to a lot of families where you have parents that were very, very smart and successful. They were just mom and dad to me. I didn't have any idea of what pioneers they were as I was growing up. And I was telling a friend the other day, George Johnson, who actually founded Johnson Products, how I appreciate my parents more and more every year. What they achieved. But I'll start with my dad. My dad was a Tuskegee Airman. He flew over 100 missions. He was in the original 99th Fighter Pursuit Squadron. And I actually just got a copy. As we're all doing spring cleaning, I got a copy of a letter that he wrote to his sister when he was getting ready to go off to war, where he talks about how he's going to be fighting for freedoms that he didn't enjoy here in the United States, and how tough that was. He was willing to die for America, even again, when he couldn't really benefit from the kind of freedoms that we were fighting for. So what he taught me was that the most important thing in life is to live up to the commitments that you make to others. And he pounded that home to me. And he said that just, very few people do that. Very few people keep their word. But if you live up to the promises you make to others, good things will happen. And that was how he lived his life, and it made such a difference to me. He also, of course, bought stocks for me every birthday and every Christmas after I was 12 years old, and made sure that I got exposed to the stock market. And he made sure I got a summer job at age 16, and I was a vendor at the ballpark selling Cokes and beer at Wrigley Field and Sox Park. So he had these really strict things that were going to happen to me, and it really helped shape me as a person. On the other side, my mom, she was inspired to be a lawyer because her grandfather J.B. Stratford owned the Stratford Hotel that was burned down in the famous Tulsa race riots 100 years ago. And he escaped Tulsa just by the skin of his teeth. And Tulsa was trying to extradite him back because he was a leader in Tulsa at the time and owned this very successful hotel. The whites in Tulsa at the time were trying to help, blame him for being part of inciting that riot, which of course was not true. And my grandfather, my mom's father, used his legal skills to stop Tulsa from extraditing him back. And my mom said, she said she became a lawyer because she saw her father save her grandfather's life with his legal skills. And that led to my mom being the first African-American woman to graduate from the University of Chicago, and then being the first African-American woman assistant U.S. attorney, deputy solicitor general, and many, many firsts in her career. And so what I learned from her was that anything was possible. You could be the first of something. And I think that was an inspiration for us to be the first African-American owned money management and mutual fund company in the country's history. So even though they both talked to me about the racism they experienced in Chicago and the lack of opportunity as Black lawyers in the 40s and the 50s, my mom in particular said, don't let that bother you. If you go out there and fight and work hard and you're creative, anything can happen. And that was an important lesson that my mom pounded home. Everything was possible.
Yes, great lesson. Thank you for sharing, John. What advice do you have for our students in the audience, and what can they be doing now to position themselves to excel in finance and their future careers?
Well, as you know, we created a program. I work with the competition. I've been on the University of Chicago board for, I think, close to 20 years, and I'm vice chairman of the board. And one of the things we've done there for minority students interested in finance, we created a program called the Rogers Scholarship Program for minority students to work in the investment offices of major endowments in the United States.
Okay.
And my idea was that they got paid summer internships to work in these endowment offices. They'd learn two things would be very valuable. One, they would learn about how much fun it is to work in an endowment office or helping to enhance the returns and make the university or nonprofit institution that you're involved with just stronger financially. And it's a social mission that we all agree. If we can get our universities stronger, they'll be able to create more scholarships and more opportunities. So we thought that would be exciting for young people to sort of hope to be the next David Swinson or the next Kim Liu, who's at Columbia now, managing big endowments. The second thing, of course, though, if you work in an endowment office, you're going to learn about careers that often minority students have not thought about. You'll learn about private equity. You'll learn about hedge funds. You'll learn about venture capital. You'll learn about infrastructure and all the different fund concepts that are out there, and get to network with some of the leaders of those firms when they come in to pitch their services. And so the dream is that by exposing minority students in particular, and young students in particular, to careers in those parts of the economy, again, that's where the wealth and jobs are today. I think, the latest list of top 20 hedge fund managers came out just last week, and the top guy made $3.8 billion last year. The fourth guy, Ken Griffin, of course, is here from Illinois, and he's consistently makes $1 to $2 billion a year in minimum. So we want, like my mom taught us, we want all of our students at our local institutions to dream big and realize that they are as smart as everyone else from all the other institutions throughout the United States. And why not think about working in places where if you're successful, you can make really meaningful impact for yourself personally, your family, your community, and the institution that you love to help get you educated. So that's what I try to tell young people. Think about, if you're going to be working so hard, be involved in the parts of the financial industry that pays the biggest dividends and creates the most wealth. That's kind of the message. But also, or work within your endowment office where you can help make the institutions that care about higher education, make them stronger financially, because you're helping them to solve how to invest their money more effectively.
Thank you. Great advice. And now I'm thinking of internships in our endowment office as well. My last question before we get into the formal Q&A, and I think it's something that everyone would like to ask. So how did you beat Michael Jordan playing one-on-one? I haven't seen the film. I read the account about it, but I heard there's film out there.
Well, thank you for asking. I've been having so much fun with that, even all these years later. It's just you get some lucky breaks in life. It is on YouTube. If you Google it, just John Rogers, Michael Jordan, or the one thing Michael Jordan doesn't want you to see, and I think it's somewhere between 5 and 10 million hits now. So it's easy to find. But the reason I was fortunate to win, one was it was a short game. It was first person to 3 baskets wins. And the second thing I tell people was that, he every year at his fantasy camp, I was at the fantasy camp. It's called the Senior Flight School for people who are 35 years old or older. And one day at the camp every year, he would challenge any camper to the short games of one-on-one. In the first 7 years of the camp, no one had ever beat him. So to answer your question directly, I think partly, when no one beats you in 7 years, you kind of get overconfident, especially if you're the greatest player in the world. He just finished playing his last season with the Wizards. Number two, I think he was tired because he'd played about 20 campers that day. So by the time he got to me, he was overconfident and tired. And then finally, my old coach, Pete Carrill at Princeton, always told me that, Johnny, you're legally blind. I can't teach you how to pass, but you're a good one-on-one player because you don't have to pass when you play one-on-one, And so I always had these tricky shots that Malik knows well, that I could make hard layups going left hand, going right hand. And so I think I surprised him a little bit because the last shot that I made, when he clamped down on the last shot, you can hear him say, "Oh no," while the ball was in the air, which is kind of fun end of the video, and ended up getting lots of visibility. I was on John Thompson's radio show that evening, former Georgetown coach, the late former Georgetown coach, and then a couple stories in Sports Illustrated and a few television spots along the way. And it's been really fun.
Well, thank you. Thank you for sharing your time with us. Let's get on to the questions, and I'll try and read them as they come in. Okay. So they just opened it. Anything else you want to share with us until we get questions?
Well, this has been great to work with you, and congratulations on your leadership. I know how much Malik loves DePaul. He's constantly telling me how extraordinary the place is. What a great job you're doing.
Yeah, and actually, we were just talking before you came on earlier, and we are saying we haven't seen each other in a while because there have been no games at Wintrust. Right, so it's kind of a odd situation, not having games to go to because that's usually my holiday schedule. My wife and I will go to all the games we can, men's, women's games, so to speak, and it's been tough, but. So and so. So let me get started. We have a question which came up. What are your thoughts on halting trading, such as with GameStop and AMC? Why halt on upward momentum? How does this reconcile with market works best untouched?
Wow, that's a tough question. I do agree that you don't want to create new constraints on trading. I think that would be unfair, for people who've been able to, play the game fairly and they're starting to win and beat out some of the traditional firms with their acumen and their skills. I think you don't want to have any feeling that the market is overly regulated and skewed toward professional investors relative to traditional retail investors. I do know, though, exchanges have typically had circuit breakers that they've put in over time. I think after the 1987 crash that I remember was quite painful when the market went down 22% in one day.
Yeah.
I understand why you have circuit breakers, but those should be temporary, and that's the way it's set up. So I think you should make sure that all the rules that you make and fit in with the rules that have been in place now for literally 30 years and not create new constraints based upon this new phenomenon.
Okay. Thank you. We have another question from Joe Kosinski. What ideas do you have regarding how we can advance scholarships for underrepresented students?
Well, I think that in general, I think that most elite institutions, are focused on that. And I know you guys are very committed to it. I know that Chicago is very committed to it. I think that's something that's really, really important. But I think if we if we want to do even more, we've got to create more wealth in the Black and brown communities. We started with that conversation about the wealth gap getting larger and larger in this country, going the wrong direction. If we have more successful minority business leaders and more successful minority entrepreneurs that are doing really well, they will share their wealth with local institutions that are concerned about scholarships for diverse students. And so this is a virtuous circle. And we need more diversity on the boards of our local institutions. Again, we need our local institutions to do more business with minority businesses to create wealth. As I mentioned, I had this conversation with Bob Zimmer in Chicago, maybe it was 12 years ago. We were having lunch and talking about the fact that the dearth of successful minority entrepreneurs in Chicago. And I said, Bob, if every progressive institution like Chicago doesn't work with minority-owned companies and doesn't insist that the majority companies that work with them, they're law firms, they're audit firms, they're consulting firms, they're money managers. If you are not committed to making sure those guys have diverse teams on the relationship, it helps explain why there's not a growth in wealth in our community. So I come back to that to say that if we really want to have more scholarships for minority folks, we have to have more successful minority business leaders and more successful minority business. And we can help make that happen, all of us together, by asking these tough questions and leading in the way that Harold Washington led when he was the mayor of Chicago, Maynard Jackson when he was the mayor of Atlanta. They asked these tough questions, and all of a sudden, you ended up with more minority business leaders and more successful minority entrepreneurs that had more wealth to give to the communities that they care deeply about. It just makes sense. We're going to give more to things that impact our communities, but we can't do that if we don't have success in our careers.
Thank you. As this is somewhat related from an anonymous attendee, what advice do you have for students who want to be entrepreneurs, and how do you build a lasting leadership team and strategy?
I should say, as I'm about to answer, I should go back on one last thing I said about Chicago. I said over this last 11 years, they went from basically 0 to now 95 relationships with minority-owned companies that have been very successful, from everything from advertising and WVO and radio to using Black law firms, accounting firms, consulting firms, advertising agencies, public relations firms, photographers, and money managers for the endowment. They do everything and have created a real permanent wealth by doing that program. The question of successful entrepreneurship, can you sort of phrase that one more time? I want to make sure I get that exactly right.
Okay, let me see.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. I have to wonders of chat. It disappeared. What advice do you have for students who want to be entrepreneurs, and how do you build a lasting leadership team and strategy?
So I think if you want to be a successful entrepreneur, I always tell people, it's like what Warren Buffett always says, invest in your circle of competence. So you find the area that you know best, that you love reading about, thinking about, studying, because you will have a better chance of truly being a true expert and change maker in an area that you know better than anybody else. Mm-hmm. So like I loved investing. That's what my father exposed me to. And hopefully I created an expertise in small and mid-cap value investing over the last 38 years. So again, be a true expert in the niche that you believe. Secondly, be innovative, be different. Everyone knows this who wants to be an entrepreneur, but the best entrepreneurs are the ones that take an industry and transform it. I was on a Zoom earlier today with Reed Hastings, and what he did with Netflix was amazing. We know what people have done with Apple. We know, with music, you see it, all the great musicians are the ones that are innovative and creative and have a new sound that comes out ahead of everybody else's. So I tell entrepreneurs, don't have a Me Too product. Make sure you're doing something innovative and different from your peer group. That's what we've always tried to do, and I think that's so important. Third, like everyone says, you need enough capital to last through the tough times. And have more capital than you think, and enough capital to hire experts to help you with your expertise. Because I think sometimes people try to do everything. They try to create the product, they try to do this marketing, they try to answer the phone, they try to, I always say surround yourself with talented teammates, and you'll be able to be more successful, even if it means that you have to give up some of the ownership in your company.
Yeah.
If it means you have to get more capital than you'd like to raise to hire these folks. If you come out of the box with a strong, strong team, you're going to differentiate yourself from the peers. And that's one of my thoughts. To develop great leadership, the other part of the question, what we've tried to do at Ariel is to, when you find someone who's a superstar, let them carve out their own niche, where it's not that they're waiting for me to tell them what to do, but I sort of found, here's an area I can tell they love, that they're talented in and good at it. And I say, you go for it. You figure out your own solutions to these problems, and something you'll feel ownership in as the years go on. And you can see the distinctive change you've made in our organization by the areas that you've provided leadership in. So when Arnie Duncan worked here at Ariel, he was in charge of all of our community affairs. And he developed the idea for the Ariel Community Academy small public school, where we teach inner city kids about the stock market. He loved having a chance to build his own school.
Yeah.
And that led to him going to work for the Board of Education and becoming school superintendent, which helped lead him to be known by President Obama. And so he got to be the Secretary of Education.
Yeah.
But we went with that and blossomed, and then what I did with Arnie is I took him to meet all the people that I knew who loved investing. Loved education. And people like Irving Harris, who the Harris School was named after, who I knew loved early childhood education. I took him to meet John McCarter, who ran the Field Museum and loved education. And it helped enhance. So one, giving people an opportunity to lead, but then using your network so they can meet all the people that they need to help them be the best at what they want to be. And final example, I could go on too long, but Melody Hobson, who's been at our firm 30 years, she loved marketing. And over time, she hadn't been at the firm 3 years, where she had run the old head of marketing out of here because Melody was outperforming her so well. She kept living up to all the commitments she made to me. So I kept giving her more and more to do. The next thing you know, she's basically running the place. But she was in charge of all of our branding, all of our image making. She came up with the idea of how we can have our own mutual fund family on our own at Ariel. And she led that. And now she's leading Project Black, our newest product line. And she created our international global area. So when you allow people to use their own imaginations, they come up with all these great ideas and all these great solutions that you could have never thought of on your own.
Yeah.
And then they want to stay at the firm because they have a chance to feel like they're making this their firm too. And the final parts of this is, and it was a long answer, I'm sorry, but I took Melody to meet all the people I thought she needed to meet to be an expert in our field. So I got her to meet John Bogle, who founded Vanguard Group, because I knew John through Princeton and I knew he would love Melody. I took her to see Dick Parsons when he was running Dime Savings Bank, well before he became the African-American CEO of Time Warner, and had this extraordinary business success. I took her to see Maynard Jackson, the mayor of Atlanta, because I thought Maynard's vision and ideas would rub off on Melody. And she loved that. That made her job interesting, where she'd get to meet all these great people and want to stay at the firm. And then finally, I gave everybody opportunity to be owners in the company. So I didn't hold all the equity close. I shared the equity with everyone, as well as the decision-making, as I've touched on. And that helped us to attract great leaders like Melody and Arnie and help them want to stay at the firm for a long time, until like Arnie found a path that was really perfect for him.
Thank you. Really good advice. Letting go sometimes is the hardest thing to do for an entrepreneur. One of our recent graduates, Marshall, with an MS in finance, asked, what advice would you have for career changers trying to get into investment management?
Well, I think career changes to get into investment management. I think nowadays, as the years have gone on, it's funny, Melody and myself and Arnie, none of us have MBAs or graduate degrees. We all stopped after college. Melody went to Princeton too, and I met her when she was a 17-year-old prospective Princeton student. But to answer the question, I think nowadays you have to go get the MBA. And like Malik got his MBA, at DePaul, and loves it, and it helped transition his career now where he's in investment management. I think it's kind of a standard, kind of check the box part, and gives you a chance to refresh. It gives you a chance to have a great internship during your summer while you're in MBA school. It helps you to network. not only with your fellow students, but the alums. I think, one of the great things that about DePaul being here, there's so many great alums who love the place. And so if you're a graduate of the business school and the university, people will see you because you have that shared bond. And then that'll help you get those interviews you'll need for that internship or that full-time job as you transition to investment management. And I'm sure there are a lot of DePaul grads here who are tied into this industry. And similarly, if you want to move into private equity or hedge fund or whatever, you're part of a great network and great family here in town.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and we have about 130 alum in the Chicagoland area. And our new chair of the board is Gerald Beeson, who's with Citadel. Right?
Perfect.
So it's a great connection. From another one, a anonymous attendee, he asked, what drives you to do what you do for marginalized individuals, marginalized members of the community?
A couple things that have impacted me. Many things have impacted me. But one, I went to a grade school called Harvard St. George. It was not very good grade school. It was really, and we didn't know, my parents didn't know. It was a private school. And a lot of Black professional families sent their kids there. It was at 47th and Ellis. And it was there for a long, long time. When I went to the lab school for high school, which I was very lucky, I realized what an extraordinary gap there was from a poor grade school to a terrific high school.
Mm-hmm.
And it made me value the education I got at lab school so much and understand the challenges that kids from disadvantaged backgrounds have of not having great educational opportunities. And I got to see that firsthand, and I got to see how poorly the folks who stayed at Harvard St. George for high school, how poorly many of them did, because they didn't have the opportunity that I got, to go to this great place, the lab school. And so I think that was the beginning. And then as I was getting going in my career and working with Arnie Duncan, he did a great job of just helping me to see the challenges that kids from disadvantaged backgrounds have. His mom had run an after-school tutoring program for inner city kids. She did it for over 50 years. So Arnie grew up every day after school with his sister and brother going to tutor inner city kids. And as I got to know Arnie later in high school, he would bring me over and to help tutor those kids.
Yeah.
And my daughter worked there. And you got to just see just the challenges that were just so severe and the unfairness of our society. And as Arnie often says, everyone talks about these kids getting a second chance. These kids never got the first chance.
Yeah.
And if we know our urban public schools have just failed so much. And so I guess as I got more and more exposed through Arnie's eyes and seeing what happens as, the challenges that we face are just so severe, and the early deaths and the poor healthcare, the poor housing, the poor, mental health of so many of the families. It's just so unfair because of the way that we came to this country, because of the traditional Jim Crow laws, the remnants of slavery, the unconscious bias, the outright racism that we've seen show up at January 6th. All those things have made life so hard. So I just feel like you're not doing your job if you're not living John Lewis's values, where John Lewis said, if you see something that's not fair, that's unjust, then we have a moral responsibility to speak up and make good trouble, and fight for others. Yeah. And I think the other part of it is, I played basketball at Princeton. Coach Krill taught you the value of teamwork. Yeah. And I always felt that when I came home to Chicago, I was part of the Chicago team, part of the African-American team. I got involved with Reverend Jackson and Rainbow Push and Jim Comp from the Chicago Urban League. And again, they inspired me to do more. Yeah. Going to Push on Saturday mornings, you just see Reverend sacrificing and dedicating his life to help others that were coming from disadvantaged backgrounds. That had a profound influence on me, and many others too. So all those things, and so finally, at the end of the day, when we had more and more success, we just felt more and more of a commitment to try to do more to create a fair and just society.
Thank you. And the thought of it being a system, it has to be a system approach. We actually screened a film, Coded Bias. Not sure if you've heard of it. It's about, we screened it last week. One of our trustees arranged for it to be screened. And it's about how AI, a researcher at MIT actually found how AI in facial recognition demonstrated bias, right? It misidentified
Yeah.
dark skinned females. They only were 76% accurate, I think. It was 90 something, low 90s for dark skinned males, but it was 99 point something percent accurate for fair skinned males. So something as basic as AI, then you start to question, okay, you really have to look at things from a system standpoint. It can't be just one thing because, and the premise was because a lot of the people writing the code, which is a algorithm, uh, were were primarily fair-skinned individuals. So when they developed the algorithm, so it's an interesting film, which one of our trustees was able to secure for us. And it's actually available to our faculty and students, I think, for the rest of the academic year. The next question I have is from Bob. And he says, he asks if you can talk in more detail regarding your work trying to get college endowments to diversify with their investment managers and having more diversity having more diversity.
Well, thank you. I've been able to have direct impact on the institutions that I've been involved in over the last several years. I was chairman of the Knight Foundation Investment Committee, and they have one of the best programs of any endowment in the country, foundation. I've been on the University of Chicago Investment Committee for, I don't know, at least 15 years. And they have over 15 minority money managers that they're working with. So I feel like I've had some direct impact that I'm positive, and they've been role models for other foundations and university endowments to do the right thing. I was part of a founder of a group called DAMI, Diversified Asset Manager Initiative. It's run out of Washington, D.C. by a guy named Robert Rabin. He's been very fixated on this issue, and he's worked with the Reverend Sharpton, has written several letters to many elite institutions, highlighting the fact that they haven't been working with minority-owned money managers, and that's a part of the economy where the wealth's created today. Congressman Cleaver and Congressman Kennedy wrote letters, I think, to the top 20 or 25 endowments in the United States, from Harvard to Notre Dame, all the top ones, to put pressure on them to be transparent with their data. And so I'm optimistic that this progressive Congress that we have and our progressive political leaders and civil rights leaders are starting to move the needle. And it's nice that we have some examples of some really good practices. Chicago Community Trust has had a long time history of doing the right things in this area. So there are some trailblazers that have shown the way that there are talented minority-owned money managers out there that have just been excluded through unconscious bias, implicit bias, the assumption. Last thing, I give this example. When I was chairman of the board of the Chicago Park District, there were 9 museums on parkland at the time. And I was pushing to get them to work with minority-owned companies in the spirit of the city of Chicago programs, because the city directly subsidizes those museums. Chicagoland taxpayers directly subsidize the museums. Well, the museums agreed, kind of think reluctantly, to do a one-day symposium for minority entrepreneurs to meet decision makers at the museums. The museums came up with a program and an invitation for the event. On the cover of the program was a man with a hard hat and a helmet and hard hat and a shovel. I'm sorry, hard hat and a shovel. And the tagline on the invitation and the program was "Digging Up Business." So the museum decision makers thought that Black people and brown people, when they did business with nonprofits, we did it with our hands in construction. Mm-hmm. And that was just like almost a definition of implicit unconscious bias. They saw us through a certain window, through this term supplier diversity, and we needed to move toward business diversity, which showed that people of color could do business in everything that's out there. Everything, yeah. So we're making progress. Still have a long, long way to go with universities and foundations in this country to get them out of that mindset of supplier diversity in construction and understand that we can do business in everything and should be included in the parts of the economy where the wealth and jobs are created today.
Thank you. And I know we had that conversation. Okay, I never forgot our conversation early on. One of the students wants to thank you for lending your time. And the question is, what are your thoughts on current market conditions? Are equity valuations, particularly in tech, justified?
Oh, Thank you. My day job. And I think the tech stocks have gotten way, way ahead of themselves. And, the FANG stocks in particular, Facebook, Netflix, Apple, Amazon, et cetera. You could justify it for a while with the historically low interest rates. That could justify extremely high multiples for companies whose earnings are going to come through in future years. And if you're creating valuation metrics based upon the discounted present value of future cash flows, low interest rates could justify high multiples. But inevitably, which is already starting to happen in the last 6 months, and particularly the last month, interest rates are going higher as inflation expectations go higher. And so those higher rates, I think, are going to be what's going to cause the S&P 500 and these large tech stocks and fast-growing tech stocks to be re-rated with much lower PE multiples. And so you'll have a substantial correction that will be very similar to what happened when the internet bubble burst, roughly 20 years ago. And the place to be is going to be traditional value stocks that are selling at modest multiples that will really recover very strongly as that economy recovers as we get past COVID. And so if you're going to be in the markets, be in the value stocks, the more cyclical companies, and try to limit your exposure to the tech stocks and the biggest weights in the S&P 500, which is the opposite of the conventional wisdom. So many people have gotten thrilled and just like these FANG stocks are the end all and be all. Yeah. But once everyone's convinced that's the end all and be all, you're getting toward the top.
Thank you. Good advice. This is a interesting question, at least when I saw it pop up. Question is anonymous from an anonymous attendee. How do you start your day, and what is your daily routine as a successful finance professional?
Oh, wow. Well, no day is the same. And in this Zoom age, every day is a 12-hour minimum day. And sometimes Saturdays and Sundays are not that much better. This is all encompassing. But I start my day 2.5 hours before my first meeting. And I spend the morning reading, the 5 newspapers, and I work out, watch Good Morning America, and while I'm on the exercise cycle. And then I started taking piano lessons 3 years ago, as a total novice. So I try to get in my morning piano practice in before that first meeting. And then the rest of the day is kind of a Zoom Zoom race, like, doing panels like this and fireside chats like this, talking to management teams of the companies we've invested in. This week we've been on the phone with many, from Bob Backus, the CEO of Viacom, to the heads of many large publicly traded companies. That's kind of what I do during the day. And then I read the research reports when I get here to the office, or I get them sent home if I'm at home, of all the different stocks that we're invested in, staying in touch with them. And then finally, Melody will tell me when I've got to get on a call with a pension fund consultant or a prospective customer, which we did today. All those things keep you busy, between the marketing, the research, keeping in touch with what's going on, being on fireside chats to talk about the market, to talk about diversity, and trying to get a work in and out in, and the piano practice in. Makes for a very, very full day.
That sounds really, really full. As a confession, I took piano when I was young, and I tried going back when I was at a different institution. I would cram, which is something you never do in piano. So we have time for one more question, and I'm really not sure if I should ask you this. This is from my athletics director, who I just hired this past summer. And his question is, what advice would you give me as the new athletics director at DePaul? And this is from Dwayne Peavy, who we hired away from Kentucky. And Dwayne is really, really nice. He and his wife, Allison, we've gotten to know, and they're just great.
I don't know how much, I shouldn't get into good trouble around this issue, but I would love, obviously, see. I grew up in a period where DePaul, I loved watching those great teams with Mark Aguirre and Terry Cummings and all those guys. And they took us to the Final Four and were so competitive and fun. So I really want us to get back to a wonderful men's basketball program that wins. And being a Princeton guy, we've had many, many players who played for Coach Ariel who are head coaches and assistant coaches throughout the league. And I think that Princeton offense, I tell Malik all the time, could bring you guys back to glory. And, John Thompson's son, who played at Princeton, he took Georgetown to the Final Four his first couple of years as a head coach. And Craig Robinson did wonderful things at Oregon State and Providence and Brown when he was the head coach there. And there are many others who have done wonderful work. So I probably shouldn't say much except to say that I've known Doug Bruno since I was in high school.
Okay.
And so he's been a great friend. And so I admire what he's been able to do with the women's team. And as a part owner of the Chicago Sky, I'm a big believer in women's basketball.
Mhm.
But I really do want rooting for you guys to get the men's team back where it needs to be.
Yeah, that was part of the guarantee I got from Dwayne.
Yeah.
Well, again, thank you for spending time with us, John, and I hope to run into you when things are quasi back to normal. And appreciate your spending time with us. And I'm not sure if Malik is going to come back on, but otherwise, I think we're adjourned for the evening.
Thank you. This has been a great interview. I really appreciate the time. I love what you're doing there at DePaul.
Thank you, and appreciate all the advice.